Most people believe that Italy's main battle tank, the C1 Ariete, is the worst tank currently fielded by any NATO member, if we don't count the M60. And don't get me wrong, the C1 Ariete is by all means NATO's worst tank. However, the reasoning behind why it's so bad is a little bit misplaced. When you ask someone why the C1 Ariete is so bad, they'll most likely say the most obvious flaw about the Ariete, that being it has little to no armor. However, if that were the case, this short wouldn't exist. You see, in order to understand the Ariete, we first need to look at Italy's topography. As you can see, it's nothing like the northern plains of Europe, meaning not having a lot of armor does play into the Ariete's strengths. However, the problem lies elsewhere. When talking about the C1 Ariete, and tanks in general, they like to talk about the armor, gun, and speed. However, they neglect the existence of other factors that can't be easily looked up by simply playing War Thunder 25/7. Motherfucker! One of these factors being low-end torque. Now, what is low-end torque? Low-end torque is the engine's ability to create torque at relatively low RPMs. Having an engine that's great at producing low-end torque is important when trying to traverse mountainous terrain, as low-end torque is useful when climbing hills. Tanks such as the Type 10, K2 Black Panther, and Leopard 1 are well known for producing a lot of low-end torque. However, when it comes to the C1 Ariete, its ability to produce low-end torque is not great. Meaning, in order for the Ariete to get the most amount of torque out of its engine, it needs to rev at high RPMs, which in turn overheats the engine. Not to mention the engine itself isn't the most reliable. Since the summer of 2025, Italy now has a few C2 Arietes. With their arrival, you'd think that most of the Ariete's problems would have been solved, right? Well, yes, but actually no. Yes, they did give the Ariete a newer engine that produces better low-end torque and doesn't overheat as much thanks to a newer cooling system. However, these fixes seem to be negated by the Ariete's new armor package. So basically, the C2 Ariete fixes a problem that wasn't necessarily a problem in the first place. Of course, these aren't the only flaws of the Ariete, like it being inherently outdated and having the same ammo rack layout as its predecessor, the Leopard 1, but I felt like its poor low-end torque issue is one that's holding the Ariete down the most.